Okay, I think we should start. It's a very great pleasure to welcome Hermione Wiltshire to this evening in the artists' talks. She's exhibited widely in Britain and was artist in residence at the Tate, and has been included in a large survey exhibition such as Elective Affinities and the most recent British Art Show. However, most of the rest of the information in the events list is incorrect, so I'll sort of allow you to gloss it as you will. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. What's incorrect about the information in the events list is that I will not be talking about interactivity, cyberspace, or IT. Anybody who's expecting that, then you're welcome to leave now, because you're not going to hear that much about it. Instead, well, not instead, I never actually was, I'm going to speak about, if you like, the self and the constitution of the self by artists. And then I'm going to move on through how gender is inscribed within language, and then hopefully show that there can be some kind of opening up of those constrictions. Always when I put these slides together, I always sort of wish that it's going to be the last time that I ever do it, where there's so much heavy talk about the body and sexuality. But that's always the way. As Angela Carter said, it's dirty work, but somebody's got to do it, about feminism. So let's start. I do the lights. Yes. I forgot to add that I'm going to include a lot of images of other artists' work. It's not a slideshow about my work in the sense that there'll be a lot of demonstrations of my work, except that I find that images from other artists help me to speak about the ideas that I'm interested in. These are two pieces that I made when I was very much beginning to make art. On the right is a sort of sketch, which is a thought. On the left, inevitably, is a head with a kind of speech bubble. So I wanted to start off the lecture by presenting the idea of making art and exhibiting it in a space as an act of speech. Now, whether that act of speech is heard or not is a different, very different matter. Here's something that I made, a rather small circle of glass, about 12 inches in diameter, utterly mute. A piece that I made called 2 Points of Speech in Sight. Two discs of unruly matter, in this case plaster, rather unfortunately plaster. I always referred to them as cowpats. Seem to be emitting some sort of orifice, which could be a mouth, could be an anus, could be about to speak, about to fart, about to emit something. At the same time, they also remind me always of two breasts, as though they're two nipples. I want to talk really about the difficulty of what I call the interpretive space. On the left, this piece of work made in the 70s I find very, very beautiful because it indicates so clearly the difficulty of communicating using that interpretive space. I'm too sad to tell you, it says on the side. A painting by Richter which, in a sense, signals the sort of emptiness that's needed, that's required in a piece of work, or the space in a piece of work, in order to mediate anything from the artist to the viewer. This space, which now seems to, or well, not now in a different way, always seems to need to be framed, need to be delineated in such an incredibly heavy and sort of clear way, as Damien Hirst's work has become so famous for. In a sense, I see it as a kind of dependence, actually, on those frames. Here, Shirzeh Hushiari, Richard Wentworth, two pieces of work which, again, signal a space for me to engage with as a viewer, but somehow I can only sort of fall into it imaginatively, if you like, with the light and the reflectivity. I'm not sure what I can do once I fall into it, apart from swim about. Piece by John Frankland, which in a way, for me, illustrates the closed nature of that space, the impenetrability of it, that I think is very prevalent in some ways now. As a viewer, we are reflected back in it, as you can see on the image on the left, and encouraged to project ourselves onto it. The work of the Spanish sculptor, whose name has momentarily left me. I always want to call her Susana Solanas. Cristina Iglesias. I knew you'd know, Richard. I was counting on you to know. And on the right, an unfortunately upturned slide of Bridget Smith. That's very sad. That's actually one of her cinema stills. So in both of these, the space is empty. Again, kind of waiting for us to engage with them. The photographs of Catherine Yass, taken in a hospital, in a way, for me, these, I mean, the fact that they're taken in a hospital is incredibly important to me, because a psychiatric hospital, in a way, that completely informs my relationship with them. But anyway, a space which perhaps is darker than those images I've just shown you. Louise Bourgeois. That darkness, for me, I think about it as a psychological space, or the psychological space of the viewer, of the artist, I beg your pardon, which is kind of closed on the right. This is a piece, I think, from the 60s. It's an image called Lair, which Louise Bourgeois often returned to. And here on the left, a much more recent piece that came in a series called Cells. There's an invitation. There's obviously, very literally, there's an access point. And here, these two images, on the right, an image that I took when I was a student, and on the left, another image of Louise Bourgeois. And really, they're up here just to indicate that that space, that interpretive space, is frequently a depressive space, in that it is stilled, in that it is kind of clinging on to some state as though nothing will change. What I always find so extraordinary is that any sort of discussion of this interpretive space or any thoughts that I have about it always get kind of invaded by the body. On the left is Rebecca Horn doing a performance, I think, in the 1970s, beautifully, I didn't see the performance, but this still beautifully describing how a body might be described in terms of a space. It's as simple as that, a gallery space in this case. Jane Parker, on the right, is still from a film that she made in black and white, where you see an intestine actually appearing from her mouth, the beginning of it, and then continually as though it's being pulled out from the interior of her body. And she then knits it into stocking stitch, into this dress formation. She talks about expelling things which shouldn't be there in order to make space for herself as a metaphor. On the left, an X-ray image from a series taken by the art duo Art2Go. Incredibly beautiful images of bodies. On the right, a photograph, I think it is, called Organ by Kate Smith. Here, of course, it's obvious, the body is only indicated rather than actually corporally there. On the left, Spiral Woman by Louise Bourgeois. On the right, one of the viral landscapes by Helen Chadwick. Here, on the left, this seems so sensory. To me, this seems so much to describe a state. I can identify with this image very profoundly. On the right, really, the body is opened up, if you like, into landscape. She was very interested at this time and talked a lot about Cronenberg's films and how he was, when she made these, and how he was the only Hollywood director who made films about the fear of the body. And this is, of course, something which affects us all profoundly, how much the body is under attack and kind of in danger. A section from Postpartum Document by Mary Kelly, and on the right, a later work that she did about middle age. In a sense, it was taken up by feminism, the necessity to fill that interpretive space. I don't think it is an interpretive space in some of the feminist work, in fact, because I think it closes it. But here, I think Postpartum Document, there is no other piece of work that has attempted to describe that space of motherhood in quite that way. What she did, for those of you who don't know about the piece, is she, for 6 years, charted her son's path into speech. And speech was symbolized by him being able to write his own name, which is where the piece finished. This is a piece of work that I made called My Touch, where the viewer is confronted by these 10 very bright red spots or dots on the wall as they enter into the gallery space. As they approach to investigate what they are, they look quite intriguing. They come in mortal danger of spiking themselves on these ferocious spikes, which kind of come directly out of the spot. So, in a way, an attempt to fill that space, that interpretative space, with myself, with my identity, and at the same time evacuate it, leave it. So, in a sense, the glass becomes some kind of bodily fluid or a sticky substance in my imagination, some sort of glue or something that I have left my presence in the gallery. And it's been something that, in a way, it'll characterize this lecture. I think it's something that is always very problematic for me, which is how much I need to fill the space and how much I want to empty it at the same time. The body employed by Joe Spence in a far more strategic way, and in a way far more direct. I don't even know if this is art exactly, but it certainly conveys her and her state. She died of cancer. This, I think, the one on the right was one of the very final. It was certainly in the final show that she made before she died. I think it was called something like Cultural Sniper, the one on the right. Again, feminism's. Well, I don't know if this is really appropriate to talk about in terms of feminism. Helen Chadwick made Ego Geometris Sum about, when did she make it? Mid-80s, I think, where she proposed that you could perhaps consolidate memory, sections of memory, into geometric shapes, as in a way of both memorializing them. I mean, this is my way of describing it, not hers, but also in a way to try and perhaps lay them to rest or something like that. And in her photographs, there was a whole series of these, I think about 8, 9, and they were, there was a photograph to go with each one where she's kind of manhandling them. On the right, you know this piece, everybody will know this piece. I think that Tracey Emin is doing something that hasn't quite been done before, which is that she exploits the sort of ersatz intimacy which the media, our sort of media lives, or our media-affected lives, offers us. And in a way, what fascinates me about what she does is that it doesn't matter whether what she says is true or not. Just like in Hello magazine, it doesn't matter whether the people's homes that are seen are real or not real, or catalogue homes or whatever, specially arranged for the photographers, or how much money they've received and all of that. What matters is that we're being told stories, or this is how I see it, and in a way that's very compelling. So I'm getting her saying, or we're getting her saying, this is me, I don't hide anything, I'm the subject matter of my work. But at the same time, it's not a question of believing or of biography. It's more a question of being told stories which may or may not be fictitious. It reminds me slightly of, oh God, now I've forgotten his name. Oh, I won't, I'll go over it. Yes, thank you. Someone paid you to come here, Richard, I think. I think as well, the other thing is about her is that there was such an extraordinary amount of attention given to her in the press, and it's a little bit like she exists on that level. It's not to do with the object. We engage with her, really, with all those photos of her sort of walking up the steps with David Bowie, or saying, come into my bathroom, or come in to have a photograph of me in my bed, or something like that. But it's always via this sort of media, or it's always mediated by the media, if you like. These are works that I made. I'm skipping about here, time-wise. These are works that I made 10 years ago or so, if not more. And I want to talk really about how, in continuation with talking about Tracey Emin, how the sort of biographical detail, and making the biographical detail the subject of your work, if you like, the feminist slogan, the personal is political, is limited, and that what you need is something like what Tracey Emin does, or what I need anyway, is some sort of aspect of fiction and of some sort of identity which the artist, which the viewer can engage with. So on the right is a piece called Apron. It's about the size of a PVC kitchen apron. Sort of spectres, female spectres I was almost making then. This was still when I was a student, where they're empty, but kind of a bit of a mess as well. Ophelia on the right, floating across this rug. It was the emptiness that became very important. So I wanted to make images which were in some way female, and in some way represented me, but at this stage, that seemed to be the truest thing. This was a series of pieces called Name Nobody, where I invented the characters, the female characters, and drew upon the fabric stores to lend me their identity in a way. And then I named them myself in as smutty a way as I possibly can, because I wanted to sexualize or kind of make almost kind of sensual in a way their names, but I actually wanted it inscribed in the names. Gemula My Heart and Tanya Blissington, lurking there on the wall. So what was really important was the emptiness in which provided a space that the viewers could then project their own fantasies of these characters onto. The one on the left was always intended to be a character out of Hotel du Lac by Anita Bruckner. On the right is Angela the secretary, a mere sliver of a thing perched awkwardly high on the wall, which you can't really see by that photo, but she was lost in space. Cindy Sherman, of course, comes to mind because we're talking about identities which we recognize and which we identify with. Madame Yvonne, a portrait photographer from the 40s and 50s who had a studio in Knightsbridge and dressed up all her very wealthy and aristocratic clients as extremely camp goddesses. And I can never quite get over the similarity between her work and Cindy Sherman. Annette Messager, disguising her own signature seems to be what's needed. Gillian Waring. This comes from a piece where she invited people to make confessions masked so that they could say and confess. They were free to say and confess whatever they wanted to. On the right, a drawing that I made at a crucial time, which was where I, in a way, stopped making work that represented the female body and started making work that represented the male body. I just want to herald the next few slides by just saying that, in a way, I now talk about this in terms of transvesticism or cross-dressing. Cross-dressing was the word that I use, but Mary Kelly, in her slide lecture she did here last summer, talked about transvestism, which I liked. So I'm just going, if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to do about 4 or 5 slides which just talk about the difficulty of inscribing gender into signs, or it's a photograph that I did on the left using collage, and I think this is very funny because I was trying so hard in a way to make the, if you like, I was looking at a lot of straight pornography at that time and wondering whether I could make it signify in any way. And this was an attempt to do that. And I was trying so hard that I got the S the wrong way round, which shows an obvious failure. On the right, a piece, one of the photographs from about 1982 by Cindy Sherman, where, I don't know how many of you know this story, where she was invited by French Vogue to work with a season's clothes. So they were duly sent over to her New York studio or wherever, and she produced a series of images. This one's my favourite. This was on show at Saatchi's, I think, some years ago. When they were actually slightly rinsed out, her face is actually really red. When the images were sent back to French Vogue, of course, they were horrified and didn't print them, didn't use them, which again shows a kind of failure. On the left, a photographic collage called Dead to You, and on the right, another one called Apple Strudel. Again, I was attempting to kind of force on the viewer the female body in an attempt to make it signify as something. In a sense, all I achieved, I think, looking back on it now, all I achieved was to make a kind of wall, or to remind the viewer of a kind of wall in which you couldn't really go any further. Female genitalia don't signal anything beyond, well, in terms of theory, or the non-phallus, not the phallus. So here was a photo, the last piece I really made about this, called Flag. I think this one needs focusing just a little bit more. Where, if you like, female genitalia are sort of helplessly kind of stuck into this big wooden structure with a magnifying glass and a sort of solidified and totally institutionalized arrangement. I then very, very nervously, extremely cautiously tried to make images to do with, at this stage, the phallus. I think in my anxiety I made images extremely camp, I think this is pure worry. It's not really anything more than that. But what it did signal was a desire to confuse and break down those solidified, if you like, gender stereotypes. So here I am, in a way, dressing up the phallus as a sort of lacy condom, as I was referring to it as. On the right, one of Gillian Waring's photographs where she's in bed with transvestites. On the left, La Fillette by Louise Bourgeois. On the right, a photograph by Jackie Kennedy, where, if you like, the male body is being penetrated. So there's a reversal there. Many artists, have tried to loosen these incredibly divisive signs. This is a piece I made called Introduce, and in a way, in the next few slides, I'm going to talk about how I tried to, at this stage, find an image that was somehow potent, or that could somehow represent potency for me. The sculpture on the left is about 3 feet big, and it's basically looks as though something is protruding through this frame out into the space of the gallery towards you as a viewer, and that glass is kind of sticking out in a sort of bulb. So it literally pushes into space. On the right, an egg trying to push upwards, if you like, or downwards. I was really interested, or at the time, I talked about my kind of search as a search for female erection. I wanted to find a sign which was equivalent, because it was quite clear that, that I couldn't find one. I, at this point, felt that perhaps a very, very pregnant belly, because it protruded into space, because it stuck out and looked as though it might almost burst, that this would serve the purpose. A pressing engagement. This is an installation in a window gallery. You can see, I think, that the glass is curved. So it's literally a sort of pregnant building. Right, these are stills from a computer-generated animation taken from original photographic sources and then built frame by frame. It's called Casanova, and if Joel doesn't mind, he'll just turn the the projector off and the video on. This was always intended to be shown as an installation. I installed it several times, hopelessly, in fact, terrible failures, and learnt about the 4th time that a kind of hole in the wall about 60 by 40 centimetres recessed back was most appropriate, and in fact looked incredibly like an oven. So this, it wouldn't be, you wouldn't see it nearly this big. Don't even know if it's going to rise. Definite castration anxiety here. Here we go. Yeah, I think that if the brightness and the sort of colour controls wouldn't make it look so nuclear in the usual way of things. Joel, is there any way of turning the yellow down a little so the bowl doesn't go so... it's difficult to see in this because it's so enlarged and it's also damped down onto video, but actually the detail in this is incredible, really. Actually, when you look at it on... No? Okay. Can you focus it even? I saw this as an object that kind of breathes and then collapses. It actually cooks as it goes up, bubbling and getting browner on the top, and getting browner as it D2 messes. I saw it as an object. It's a loop, obviously. It doesn't have a kind of, it doesn't have a narrative as such. Casanova. Obviously, I wanted a confusion or a conflation, if you like, of male and female. Or, if you like, perhaps I wanted to claim a right, if you like, to castration anxiety, which is very possessively often very possessively owned or possessed by men. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Unless you want to see another round. I think one of the hardest things for me was that how this thing that as soon as you have something moving in a gallery, it performs for you, and this, or for the viewer, and this sort of bothers me so much because, in a sense, it closes that all-important space. But I think that by that being so slow, that it still had that kind of contemplative or sort of sense of reverie. Right. This is called Semen 1. I made 2 versions of this piece, and the first was made in response to an invitation to make an installation in a disused hospital for sailors in Greenwich. It had been used for near on 400 years or something, and we were encouraged, I think, to speak about its history and who was there. So this was one of the wards, which helpfully had this blue lino, which of course for me read as C. It was 92, and Casanova, mixing up here, Columbus. I wonder what was going through my mind. Columbus was all over the place, and there were films being made, and there was that identity around. So this, for me, each piece of glass had a photograph underneath it of an erect penis. For me, it, at this stage, was very much like a sort of fleet of ships, as well as being an ejaculation. I remade the piece because I didn't want to be bound by that site. And the reference, if you like, of C is just carried in the colouring of the images, and the images were worked in a way that I actually changed them quite a lot and faded them quite a lot. And for me, the second version is more successful because it has a very, very deep melancholy for me. I've tried to work out why it is exactly why it is that this piece annoys people so much. And I've always got new theories sort of mounting up, if you like, what I'm working on. My latest one is that the difficulty that's expressed in this piece of work, I think, is represented by the fact that there are only penises in it. There are no female genitalia. This, to me, indicates that it is an encounter which is a closed one and which isn't an encounter with difference. This really is, in a way, about, or characterized, if you like, by masturbation, which, of course, is a taboo subject to talk about. And I think, perhaps, that one of the confrontational aspects of this piece of work may be because it proposes that masturbation is, if you like, characterizes sexual relations, which, of course, is very problematic because essentially masturbation is always within an enclosed and kind of solitary psychological space. I think this sort of melancholy for me is also to do with the fact that it's kind of after the event, if you like. If this is semen and it's been ejaculated from the body, it's dead. If these are sailors and they've died, imaginatively all of this is, of course, they are disappearing from memory. Very often, people come up to me and say, terribly worried, saying, "Do you know that the photographs are fading?" Which I always really love, because, again, it sort of indicates the sort of anxiety that that somehow potency or desire will deplete through time, or is somehow can only be spoken about in the past. Right, on the left was the show that I just, the photographs that you just seen, got raided instantly by the police, and this cartoon appeared in the Police Gazette. On the right, a photograph, if you like, by Robin Shaw, which was also, Semen 2 wasn't actually censored out of the exhibition in Cardiff, but it almost was. There had to be a big fight to get them to show it. This piece of work on the right was censored out of a show by Alistair Foster, which was actually about pornography. And again, it led me, of course, to wonder what it was about that. And I'm sure, and everyone I talked to was sure, that it was because there was a woman who was looking, and that is what was so taboo. And possibly that's also something that annoys people so much about Semen 2, is that, of course, I'm a woman dealing with these images or using these images to talk about myself. And this is an appropriate moment to tell you about the distinction that I make between the word that's so often overused in my view, which is pornographic, and to do with something else which pornographic isn't, which at the moment I'll call eroticism, even though I'm not sure that that's an adequate word. I think that pornography, as the word pornographic, is used to mean sexuality, which of course it's not. It's a term which is a very modern term, and speaks only, really, about regulation. It's a term that was introduced when certain material was censored from the public domain. And I think that's so important to remember, because it tells you so much, in a way, also about, to remind you what I said a minute ago about the taboo of masturbation. It is not a word for sexuality, neither, in my view, is it a word for eroticism. I think that the erotic is far more surprising and far more sort of shocking and out of control, if you like, than pornography. The pornographic script is closed, it is learnt and gone through, and that's the point of it, is that it's closed and that it contains, if you like, it contains the participant, or I was going to say the viewer, but it's not quite the word I need. So on the left is a picture, a piece by Helen Chadwick called Eroticism. On the right, an image that I made of neoclassical sculptures which produce these sort of satyr-type figures underneath domed glass, so they almost seem to lurk just behind that symbolic screen, if you like, of the imaginary. In fact, they almost seem to push out from the frame into the space, not unlike the piece I made called Introduce. So I think I want the rest of the slideshow, I want to try and talk about how to kind of rid ourselves, or rid myself, if you like, of the sort of the strict or closed space, if you like, of the pornographic, or the closed space of an interpretive space that I talked about earlier. I was invited to make a piece of work about Epstein. Strange, I know, but I rose to the challenge. And the only piece that I liked, really, was this piece called Adam, which is now, you now see, is presently installed in a stately home near Leeds, looking very out of context, really. I found out in my research about Epstein that he was completely outlawed, really. He was Jewish, he was American, and he, in the London art world, the first half of this century, just did everything they could to oust him, really, keep him as an outsider. But he still had a tremendous effect. This was first exhibited, this piece of work, on Blackpool as a sideshow, and the guy who bought it charged money for each person to come in and have a look when it was opened. So apparently the thing that was so deeply, deeply shocking was his penis. So I made an ice version of it, which gradually melts over the duration of the day. This strange contraption that you see it sitting on is a direct reference to Epstein's modelling stand, which at the Garman Ryan collection, which is where this was shown, they had beautifully cleaned up and re-stained and re-varnished, and it was now one of the exhibits, which I found very funny. Alongside this leaking phallus is some old film footage which I re-edited on a computer of the audience looking. Oh, that's tragic. It's supposed to be around the other way. I tried so hard. it was put in, you can see how it was put into a corner so that, and basically people's heads and hands are all moving about, gesticulating. The press went completely nuts, the local press, over this piece of work before it had even appeared. And on the day when I was installing it, I was completely inundated with photographers rushing to see this obscene, well, in fact, it was Chinese whispers. It got muddled. It turned into an Iceman, or an original sculpture made by Epstein in ice that had just been discovered in the fridge. And everyone got very confused. And of course, when the photographers arrived, they found a wet puddle on the floor. It was very important that the wet and that the water was left underneath the. That was as long as it didn't cause danger to anybody. Underneath the pedestal. So in a way, I mean, I loved it because it pointed so much to the worry, or to the incredible fear, or the excitement, should we say, about what the local inhabitants of Warsaw might get to see. A wall painting on the left from Pompeii, from the interior of the brothels. On the right, an etching from the 16th century, I think, which is a copy of an infamous set of etchings by Giulio Romano to illustrate a satirical, viciously satirical poem by Pietro Aretino, who was duly thrown out of Rome up to more liberal Venice. They were known as the 16 Positions. During my time in Rome, I really felt that the whole place was dying, actually, and sort of crumbling, and people are still living in it, watching it crumble. There must be many cities like that. I chose to to do what to kind of talk about that in terms of these libraries, which everybody flocks still to Rome to come and do their final bit of research for their book, or what it seemed to be like from the people I talked to just simply touch the original manuscript, which might be stored there, or perhaps just to see the portrait of somebody who a historian was writing about. And this seemed to me to be such a sort of potent and kind of sad thing, in a way, if those two things don't seem too contradictory. So these spaces, which are ancient, a lot of them are 16th century, built perhaps onto the sides of a church or as part of a palace. They're closed, very difficult to get into, and in a way totally redundant. I also found them a bit of a turn-on, really. There's these spaces which were so heightened because, in a way, they're supposed. The whole point of them is that they're for your mind, and in a way, you become so acutely aware of your body as soon as you go into them. There's never any air. There's always old air in there. They're always dusty. There's always very few people. You're supposed to be quiet. You're not supposed to laugh or talk. And that always makes me extremely aware of how much I want to make a sound, or want to talk or laugh or eat or something. So these are called the modi. I've just got 4 of them here. an attempt, I think, to draw together curiosity for knowledge with a sexual curiosity. So I now have a series of these photographs of these extraordinary places. I started to want dead people in them, or at least people who looked like they'd been overcome by something or other. Because in a way, it's this impossible thing that's impossible for me anyway, where how can something be redundant and extremely potent at the same time? Photograph by Andrea Serrano on the right, one of his morgue photographs. On the left, a working photo really of an attempt to work with these images and to enclose them in these watery glass shapes. If you like, completely close them off. And in a way, it's photographs of dead people which I'm most interested in at the moment. And as a little epilogue, this is some photographs from the catalogue of the Mack Museum in Vienna, which I found extraordinary because the director of the museum had invited artists, fine artists, to decide how a certain section of the exhibits would be shown. So this Barbara Bloom did this one on the left with all the bentwood chairs. You could walk behind as well, so you can see the actual objects. Ignore these white lines down the middle, that's just from where I've done the book. And on the right, Donald Judd, who I wish I had the catalogue with me. I intended to bring it, but lost it on the way. Because there's a beautiful bit of writing where he's kind of explaining about how flattered he is to be asked to place this exquisite interior into another interior, a museum interior, and yet how annoyed he is at the limitations that he's been given, and how uneasy it is. So in a way, why I put these in is that here it seems to me so exciting that there's a way of opening up that interpretive space into a museum. Okay, so it's still institutionalized, but it seems, in a sense, that the artists here almost have kind of emptied themselves of their bodies, of their identities, in such a way that they're in service, if you like, to the exhibit. And there's something incredibly moving about that. Two images from the artist Jenny Holzer, who, again, I think she's extraordinary because she's not dependent on that institutionalized frame of the gallery or the museum. In a sense, you see these things, sort of either wear them or see them flashing away where Piccadilly Circus or wherever we see all these signs. And they're so sensual because you're experiencing the city, you're experiencing your life, and you come upon them as opposed to the kind of drama and the manners of going into a gallery. A piece by Rosalyn Kelsey and another work by Anya Galaccia where she painted chocolate onto the walls. I'm going to finish with artists where they have if you like, made the space so extraordinarily kind of corporal that you can't but help be overwhelmed by the moisture in the piece on the left and the steam piece of the left. This is a cube of steam which is contained within a cold air wall, 4 walls of cold air draft. The smell of the chocolate and the way that it decays over the duration of the exhibition. Helen Chadwick's chocolate fountain, cocoa, or however it's said, I'm not sure what she meant. And in the background, the wreaths to pleasure. The wreaths to pleasure seemed, just as an added thing, it seemed to be, again, about almost something that has happened and will not happen again. And yet, when you went into that gallery space, I don't know how many of you saw this, but the sound and the smell was so overwhelming that it really informed anything that you thought. In a funny sort of way, your body was very far from your experience, really, because you're experiencing it with your body. There's no way that you could do anything apart from be overwhelmed by this gurgling, kind of splashy, sort of farting sounds that sort of kind of like a swamp came from the middle of the room. This is a piece of work that Helen Chadwick did in Madrid as part of the Edge Festival. Possibly a massacre, she described it as. If you like, a blood fountain. So, in a way, again, the artist has succeeded in leaving the confines of the gallery walls. There's another. Oh, let's go back again. There was another one which was a bad blood one, a sort of purpley one in the next door square, but I didn't put the slide in. But really, this is it's the fact that that I'm sort of brought back to my senses, really, by work like this. You can't avoid your body. This has to be blood. Thank you very much. That it can make performance in itself. You mean it can perform by itself? Like, what were you thinking about? Like, for instance, Mugs and Moos by any chance?
Things where there's a system in place, where there's not just objects, really, systems that are set up.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, where there are maybe architectural elements or things acting together.
Yes.
So there is a sense of change and of time-based stuff in that space. The space itself is changing, it's on the fly.
Sorry, say again?
It's on the fly, it's being generated.
Yeah.
It's being generated at each moment.
I think yes, I think that's incredibly exciting, and it's something I'm only just learning about, really. I've just been working with an architect and in a hospital. So in a way there already you've got a space which is not necessarily performative, but it's certainly got a life of its own, if you like. And that is something which I'm still really learning about. And it's very exciting, yeah, if I'm understanding you correctly. And I think perhaps things like the blood fountain, they do that. A fountain performs for you endlessly. that's its very nature. There's certainly something that worries me. Well, I don't know why it worries me, but it's also very interesting. I think Damien Hirst has said several times that I've read it, that he feels that essentially gallery spaces are theatrical. And this seems to me extraordinary because it's so different from 15 years ago, when if you said something was theatrical, it was just about the most insulting thing you could ever say about somebody's work. And somehow all the performance work that came out of the 70s, it was really important that it wasn't theatrical. And that seems to have changed now. There is a theatre. So galleries do become these kind of dramatic places, which I think is really different, is a shift. It's something that's about now. And I find that quite problematic. I don't know if anybody else does.
You spoke about pornography. I think you said that the pornographic script, the point of the pornographic script is that it's closed.
Yeah.
And that it contains the participant or participants.
Yeah.
And I was thinking also that there seems to be one of the other ideas that seems to be that people seem to feel as a defining quality of pornography is something to do with violence. And I was wondering if that might be the violence of exclusion. If it encloses the participants, then you're excluded. It's an eroticism from which the viewer is excluded.
I don't think of it quite like that. I think of, if there is violence, I associate that with something which is outside the pornographic script. I associate that with something that for now I would call eroticism, because it's precisely because it can't be contained. That's how I think about the violence. If there's violence within pornography, perhaps it's to do with the denial of difference and the fact that there is a continual resistance just to encounter difference, to encounter another fragile person, if you like. And if that metaphorically represents sexuality, then represents asexuality or a male sexuality. I don't know if that's violent in itself, but it's kind of emotionally fairly violent. Is that answering your question?
I was just wondering if you... the question isn't quite very well formulated in my mind. I was just wondering if you would be seeing that act of exclusion as an act of violence.
Not so much. I see it as an act of denial.
One of the things which excludes them, which is what contains people within this, what you describe as the pornographic script.
No, I don't see it quite like that. I don't. If there is violence, it's in the denial of difference and the difficulty, if you like, of difference, and that is taken to be some kind of universal sexuality. That I find very problematic. But it's also very real. It's a very real kind of thing that we all deal with. A statement.
Means that quality can often fall off. And I think, there have been moments when you can speak to
Mm.
It isn't, you're not obliged to put it up.
But in a sense, that's an extraordinary pressure, and my recent experience of what started out as a public art project with an architect, that got turfed out pretty soon, and I basically sort of collaborated with him, and it was such a relief, such an incredible relief not to have to appear, if you like, as me. I don't quite know where that gets me, apart from experiencing something else. The collaborative thing, the collaborative part of that process was a delight, precisely because it's so different, and I don't have control from the beginning to end. I don't know where that gets us at all. Richard?
Well, I sometimes think that it's an area that's very difficult to talk about. It's seldom dealt with critically.
Right.
I'm happy with just a bloom, got a little bit of ground. I think there's also that irony of people wanting to always swap flesh, exchange places, dream of being in some other discipline.
That seems to be, from what I find out, very strong between artists and architects. That seems to be a sort of lurking, mutual sort of envy going on. I think people must know what I'm talking about, otherwise they wouldn't be laughing.
Often when artists want to make bigger pieces and architects want to make more pieces.
But I think, I mean, both the relief and the sort of worry is to do, of course, with losing my sense of me and my statement, and losing my voice in this collaborative work that I've done. Or that's that. I mean, I can only describe it by that sort of totally contradictory thing of being a great relief and also a great worry, that I'll kind of become mute again. Anyone else? Lucy?
I just, given that there's a lot of people working with space and body and those issues, I'm wondering why you choose these forms, these materials, as opposed to, for example, making a film, making sound work. There's lots of different ways, and lots of different media, so why media?
I studied sculpture, and I think that I needed the concreteness of sculpture initially. I needed the plasticity, and if you like, the fact that it's outside the body and can be moved around, almost using it to act out things, to use psychoanalytical term. But I think with my use of photography, sort of very quickly when I started making work, showed that I also wanted that concreteness to be suspended, and it's that area that I've used really to sort of satisfy that side of my work. I've always imagined and kind of fantasized that I would go and make films and stuff, but I never have, apart from the Casanova piece.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, on your behalf, I'd like to